Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Three Wide. I'm your host, Radney Crawford. Today, we're going to be focusing solely on Ross Chastain in yet another on-track incident involving, again, Kyle Larson. But before we dive into that, let's hear from our presenting sponsor, Hunt to Harvest. Before we move on to our next topic, let me tell you about our friends over at Hunt to Harvest. Now, if you're wanting to update and upgrade your hunting apparel, head over to hunttoharvest.com and check out their spring 2023 collection, where they have new styles in for turkey hunters and different types of fishing. Now, they still have plenty of hats, especially in the Richardson 112 style, and their mystery box special is still going on. So do not hesitate to click on that link below and support this great brand who know hunting is about spending time with loved ones, providing for your family through the harvest, and giving thanks to the one who created all things big and small. And when you go over there and go to checkout, be sure to enter that promo code RADNEY18923 to get an additional 10% off on your purchase at checkout. So diving right into the on-track action, you had William Byron come away with the win at Darlington on throwback weekend. Williams' paint scheme was a throwback to Jeff Gordon, but it wasn't William in the headlines once again after a race. It was Ross Chastain in yet another on-track incident, and again involving Kyle Larson. So diving into right into what happened, going into turn one on a restart with 6 to go, Chastain's on the inside, Larson's on the outside. Chastain gets a slight advantage going through the corner, but goes to squeeze Larson up against the wall to break Larson's momentum, make Larson have to get out the gas, but Chastain loses control of his car. Both of them end up wrecked. Chastain's day is done. Larson's day is effectively done as far as competing for the win. And immediately the backlash was on from this incident. You had Larson's crew chief, Cliff Daniels, make comments on the radio. He hopes Chevrolet's paying attention. This is the third time they've been taken out by this guy. And also Mr. Rick Hendrick in his post-race media conference making comments like, Ross, there was no need to be that aggressive. And that basically if, his guys continue to get wrecked, Ross is going to end up wrecked as well, and hopes that Justin Marks has a conversation with his driver. Diving into those comments, let's start with Cliff Daniels. He hopes Chevrolet's paying attention. I'm sure Chevrolet was not happy that their top two drivers were taken out in one incident that was completely avoidable. I will say, I agree with Rick's comment that there was no need for Ross to be that aggressive. Ross had a little bit of an advantage going through the corner. Yes, Larson would have the momentum coming out of turn two, but I figure Ross will be able to stay right there and continue to battle for the lead going into 3 and 4. Ultimately, Ross chose not to do that. He even said in his interview in the Iffield Care Center that he was trying to squeeze Larson up to the wall. And looking more at Rick's comments where basically if his guys continue to get wrecked, Chastain's going to end up wrecked as well. Larson doesn't exactly have this, clean sheet as far as incidents on the track. Denny Hamlin's admitted as much on his podcast, saying Larson's one of those guys that's going to put you in a tough situation where you're either going to have to get out of the gas or you're going to end up in the wall. So Larson is this aggressive driver, but on a much more quieter scale. You do have Chastain where with all the incidents he's been in throughout his career, especially this year alone in the Cup Series, everything he does is going to be met with more scrutiny and under a microscope. And in some cases, it should be. You look back at one of the incidents that Cliff Daniels was talking about over at Dover where Chastain wrecked Brennan Poole going into turn one, a lapped car that took out Kyle Larson 80 laps in, a completely avoidable situation that Ross did not need to be that aggressive. And one of the other races that they're talking about where Larson was taken out was Talladega, where I've mentioned over, in my videos over the past couple weeks, to me, that is a super speedway type incident. The only thing Chastain's really guilty of in that case, I believe, is pushing Gregson too hard in the corner, getting him out of shape. But after that, the hole opened up, Chastain went to fill it, and Noah came down on him. Super speedway style incident. I don't think that's anything that you can point purely a finger at Ross Chastain. And going back to Larson's track record, you can look back as little as 8 laps earlier on a previous restart where the roles were reversed. You had Larson on the inside, Chastain on the outside. Looking at the replay, going into turn one, they're already making contact. They're already banging off of each other going in the corner. Larson's already trying to squeeze Chastain up against the wall. And as they're going through the corner, they're racing hard, but a big wreck breaks out behind them with Martin Truex Jr. But if you keep watching Chastain and Larson going through the corner, you see Larson push Chastain up into the wall where Chastain makes pretty good contact with it. So that move was not met with nowhere near any scrutiny. The only mention of it I saw was Clint Boyer on the broadcast saying that's going to be something to watch in the future. That's pretty interesting. But as soon as Chastain tries it, again, I think it's the simple case of Chastain was further ahead than Larson, whereas Larson was completely even with Chastain in that deal. And Larson, we know, is a great driver. He's a guy with great car control. He's had success across all different series, styles of racing. And whereas Chastain, really, this is his second year in top Cup Series equipment. And that's another piece of it. Maturity. Ross is going to get better at this. He with each start, I believe he will gain more and more knowledge on when to push it and when not to, especially with these incidents. Unfortunately, it's a hard way to learn, but that's what happens. That's a lot of this case. You look early at Joey Logano's career, Brad Keselowski's career, Tony Stewart. I mean, Kyle Busch, several Hall of Fame worthy drivers opened up their career as aggressive guys. Not quite to the level, I believe, of Ross Chastain, just because it seems like every week we're talking about something with Ross. But over time, we see them get better at making these kind of moves. And I believe it'll be no different than Ross. If anything, it'll be scary when Ross is able to get better control of this car and make smarter choices with when and how aggressive to be, and the stuff he could probably pull off. But again, going back to the deal where Larson squeezes Chastain into the wall, if that can be looked at as just good hard racing, two drivers going for the win, getting aggressive, why can't Chastain's move be looked at the same way? Albeit you can say, it wasn't pulled off as well as Larson. Chastain didn't do as good of a job and made a mistake. Instead, it's, this complete blow up, especially on social media, about how bad he is for the sport. Why is he, Trackhouse supporting this? Why is NASCAR not doing anything about it? Is NASCAR showing favoritism to Ross Chastain? Look, Ross, like it or not, is good for the sport. Ross is right now the needle mover for NASCAR. And I know he hasn't won this year, but he is the one that's making the headlines. He's the one that's getting spots on ESPN. He was on Pat McAfee this past week discussing his racing career, the incident with Noah Gragson at the end of the Kansas race. And I don't even know how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of people watch that show. But that's how the sport grows, is getting drivers like that out there. We want these guys to show more personality, to get out of their comfort zone and get attention on the sport. Ross is doing that. Ross, and if Trackhouse is smart, they're getting on top of it, and they're getting ready to promote Chastain really hard. But we got to be careful here. And I'm about to play the comments from Dale Jarrett, which I think hit a lot of points when him and Ross were in the media center together earlier in the race weekend, with Ross running a throwback to Dale's UPS paint scheme. But also with it being this Darlington race weekend and, throwback weekend, the 75th anniversary of NASCAR and the top 75 drivers list completed, a lot of these legends were there, and some were asked about Ross Chastain. Jeff Bodine being one who flat out said that these other drivers need to just get over it. Apparently they never, they've obviously never driven against Dale Earnhardt Sr. And that is a hot point for a lot of fans talking about Ross. But Jeff's got a point there. Earnhardt, he was aggressive, especially earlier in his career, made a lot of mistakes, but eventually got his skill, toned down and polished, and became the intimidator, became the legend that we know today. There's no reason why Chastain can't do the same. He's still early in his career, but also you had Ernie Irvan on the flip side of it. In an interview with him, he makes mention of Ross needs to be careful because eventually you're going to run out of people to support you, to help fund your racing career. And that's a good point by Ernie. Ernie came into this sport, was a very aggressive driver to the point where he had to get called out at the driver's meeting. And you saw him kind of tone things down. So a lot of wisdom there from Ernie Irvan. Surely that's a good guy that I would have paired Ross up with to have a sit down with, because I think Ernie could bring a lot of experience and a whole different viewpoint to it for Ross. But let's go ahead, dive into Dale Jarrett's comments that he made in the media center, basically going into defense of Ross Chastain's driving style.
L. Pierce from Auto Week. Your dad was known as Gentleman Ned. He hardly ever got any kind of conflict. you sort of learned from him, because I don't know that any of us remember a time when you were maybe accused of being a dirty driver. Has the sport changed to a point now where you almost have to sometimes be a dirty driver? Whereas back in the day when you were driving and your dad was driving, you might be able to win on talent in car alone more so than just on attitude. Has it changed that much? And the other question is, how is your dad?
Okay. Let me address this first. That talking about a dirty driver, the way that Ross, and I know that he's in the conversation a lot because of his driving style. I've seen nothing from Ross that he is a dirty race driver whatsoever. Is he an aggressive driver? Absolutely. Do you have to be more aggressive today than maybe in the past? I think there's merit to that you better be a little more. I've said a number of times, I'm not sure how I would survive in today's world as far as a driver goes, because I know the style that I had. I know the style that my dad had. Now, because there weren't as many cameras back in the 1960s, there were times that my dad was in things. I remember those. And I asked David Pearson once in an interview that I said, my dad was called Gentleman Ned. I said, did you ever have any run-ins? And David's answer was, well, I never called him Gentleman Ned. He wasn't that to me. So there were times. It just wasn't as publicized. Everything that these guys do now, we have slow motion of every move and are able to critique and criticize, if you will. But Ross's style is his style, and it's very good. And as I told him on the phone the other day, I hope he doesn't change that because of pressures that come from outside. He has to do what got him here and got him opportunities, and I hope he continues that, because it's a style that has suited others well through the years. It's not for everybody, and we don't want, and I talk we, the media and fans, we don't want everybody to be the same. And so, I think this is, his style and the way he's going about it. Getting blamed for everything that goes on the damn racetrack is getting a little old, in my opinion. Hell, guys on the opposite side of the track are saying it was Ross's fault, so getting a little ridiculous. But so that being said, yeah, my style was different. I went about things. There are a lot of these guys, I wasn't as talented as them, so I couldn't do the things with the car. I had to do things my way, and a lot of that was from the way that I watched my dad and the things that I learned from my dad, and even from David Pearson, and looking at him through the years.
And so looking at Dale Jarrett's comments, I agree with all that he said. We definitely don't want Ross to go and change his driving style, because let's face it, like it or not, Ross is the main event of the race weekend. He's the one that everyone's talking about. He's, I think, the ones that gets new fans to tune in. Hey, what's this guy going to do this week? So we as fans, we want these drivers to show their personality. So when we get a guy that does it, we need to be careful and not make him do away with it, not make him close himself up and completely shut down on us. So coming up this weekend at North Wilkesboro, this is going to be a race to watch. Obviously, the name, the North Wilkesboro name itself is enough reason to tune in. But with it being an all-star race, the first time back since the mid-'90s, this could be a place where we might see some people send a message to Ross to say that's enough. We're not going to put up with it anymore. It's a, non-points event, all money on the line. And with this style of track, this could be a place where we start seeing some people pay Ross back. Who it could be, I don't know. It could be anyone in the field at this point, as many run-ins as Ross has had. But that'll wrap up this week's episode. Thank you, as always, for joining me and watching along. Don't forget, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you can know when our new videos drop, as well as our weekly fantasy picks. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their week. We'll meet same time next week and go over all the action and all the excitement from the return to North Wilkesboro.